Chapter 89. The Night. Monsieur de Monte Cristo waited, according to his usual custom, until Dupre had sung his famous Suivez-moi. Then he rose and went out. Morrel took leave of him at his door, renewing his promise to be with him the next morning at 7 o'clock, and to bring Emmanuel with him. Then he stepped into his coupe, calm and smiling, and was at home in 5 minutes. No one who knew the Count could mistake his expression. When on entering he said, "Ali, bring my pistols with ivory stock." Ali brought the box to his master, who examined his arms with a solicitude very natural to a man who was about to entrust his life to a little powder and shot. These were peculiar pistols, which Monte Cristo had made to shoot at a target in his room. A cap was sufficient to drive out the ball, and from the adjoining room no one would have suspected the Count was, as sportsmen would say, keeping his hand in. He was just taking one in his hand and looking for the point to aim at. On a little iron plate, which served him as a target, when his cabinet door opened and Baptistin entered. Before he had spoken a word, the Count perceived in the next room a woman, veiled, who had followed closely after Baptistin, and now, seeing the Count with a pistol in his hand and swords on the table, rushed in. Baptistin looked at his master, who made a sign to him, and he went out, closing the door after him. "Who are you, madame?" said the Count to the veiled lady. The stranger cast one look around her, to be certain they were quite alone. Then bending as if she would have knelt, and joining her hands, she said, with an accent of despair, "Edmond, you will not kill my son." The Count retreated a step, uttered a slight exclamation, and let fall the pistol he held. "What name did you pronounce then, Madame de Morcerf?" said he. "Yours," cried she, throwing back her veil. "Yours, which I alone, perhaps, have not forgotten, Edmond. It is not Madame de Morcerf who is coming to you. It is Mercédès." "Mercédès is dead, Madame," said Monte Cristo. "I know no one now of that name." "Mercédès lives, sir, and she remembers, for she alone recognized you when she saw you, and even before she saw you, by your voice, Edmond, by the simple sound of your voice, and from that moment she has followed your steps, watched you, feared you, and she needs not to inquire what hand has dealt the blow which now strikes Monsieur de Morcerf." "Fernand, do you mean?" replied Monte Cristo, with bitter irony. "Since we are recalling names, let us remember them all." Monte Cristo had pronounced the name of Fernand with such an expression of hatred that Mercédès felt a thrill of horror run through every vein. "You see, Edmond, I am not mistaken, and have cause to say, spare my son." "And who told you, madame, I have any hostile intentions against your son?" "No one, in truth, but a mother has a twofold sight. I guessed all. I followed him this evening to the opera, and have seen all." "You have seen all, madame. You know that the son of Fernand has publicly insulted me," said Monte Cristo, with awful calmness. "Oh, for pity's sake!" "You have seen that he would have thrown his gloves in my face, if Morrel, one of my friends, had not stopped him. Listen to me. My son has also guessed who you are. He attributes his father's misfortunes to you." "Madame, you are mistaken. They are not misfortunes. It is a punishment. It is not I who strike Monsieur de Morcerf. It is Providence which punishes him." "And why do you represent Providence?" cried Mercédès. "Why do you remember, when it forgets, what Argenina and his vizier to you, Edmond? What injury has Fernand Mondego done you in betraying Elie d'Abelin?" "And madame," replied Monte Cristo, "all this is an affair between the French captain and the daughter of Vasiliki. It does not concern me. You are right, and if I have sworn to revenge myself, it is not on the French captain, nor on the Count de Morcerf, but on the fisherman Fernand, the husband of the Catalan Mercédès." "Ah, sir," cried the Countess, "how terrible a vengeance for a fault which fatally made me commit! For I am the only culprit, Edmond. If you owe revenge to any one, it is to me. who had not fortitude to bear your absence and my solitude. But, exclaimed Monte Cristo, why was I absent, and why were you alone? Because you have been arrested, Edmond, and were a prisoner. And why was I arrested? Why was I the prisoner? I don't know, said Mercédès. You do not, madame, at least, I hope not. But I will tell you. I was arrested and became a prisoner because under the arbor of La Réserve, the day before I was to marry you, a man named Danglars wrote this letter which the fisherman Fernand himself posted. Monte Cristo went to a secretaire, opened a drawer by a spring, from which he took a paper which had lost its original color, and the ink of which had become a rusty hue. This he placed in the hands of Mercédès. It was Danglars' letter to the Procureur du Roi, which the Count of Monte Cristo, disguised as a clerk from the house of Thomson and French, had taken from the docket of Edmond Dantès on the day he had paid the 200,000 francs to Monsieur de Beauvue. Mercédès read with horror the following lines. The Procureur du Roi is informed by a friend to the throne and the religious institutions of his country that an individual named Edmond Dantès, second in command on board of the Pharaon, this day arrived from Smyrna after having touched at Naples and Porto Ferrajo, has been the bearer of a letter from Murat to the usurper, and again taken charge of another letter from the usurper to the Bonapartist Club in Paris. Ample corroboration of this statement may be obtained by arresting the above-named Edmond Dantès, who either carries the letter from Paris about with him, or has it at his father's adobe. Should it not be found in possession of either father or son, then it will assuredly be discovered in the cabin belonging to the said Dantès on board the Pharaon. How dreadful, said Mercédès, passing her hand across her brow, moist with perspiration. And that letter? I bought it for 200,000 francs, madame, said Monte Cristo. But that is a trifle, since it enables me to justify myself to you. And the result of that letter? You well know, madame, was my arrest, but you don't know how long that arrest lasted. You don't know that I remained for 14 years with a quarter of a league of you in a dungeon in the Chateau d'If. If you do not know that each of those 14 years, I renewed the vow of vengeance which I had made the first day, and yet I knew not you had married Fernand, my calumniator, and that my father had died of hunger. Can it be? Cried Mercédès, shuddering. That is what I learned on leaving my prison 14 years after I had entered it, and that is why, on account of living Mercédès and my deceased father, I have sworn to revenge myself on Fernand, and I have avenged myself. And you're sure the unhappy Fernand did that? I am satisfied, madame. He did what I have told you. Besides, that is not much more odious than a Frenchman by adoption, having passed over to the English, a Spaniard by birth, having fought against the Spaniards, a stipendiary of Ali having betrayed and murdered Ali, compared with such things, which is the letter you have just read. A lover's deception, which the woman who has married that man ought certainly to forgive, but not so the lover who was to have married her. Well, the French did not avenge themselves on the traitor. The Spaniards did not shoot the traitor. Ali, in his tomb, left the traitor unpunished. But I, betrayed, sacrificed, buried, having risen from my tomb by the grace of God to punish that man. He sent me for that purpose, and here I am. The poor woman's head and arms fell. Her legs bent under her, and she fell on her knees. Forgive, Edmond, forgive for my sake, who love you still. The dignity of the wife stopped the enthusiasm of the lover and the mother. Her forehead almost touched the carpet when the Count sprang forward and raised her. Then, seated on a chair, she looked at the manly countenance of Monte Cristo, on which grief and hatred still impressed a threatening expression. Not crush that accused race, murmured he. Abandon my purpose at the moment of its accomplishment. Impossible, madame, impossible. Edmond, said the poor mother, who tried every means, when I call you Edmond, why do you not call me Mercédès? Mercédès, repeated Monte Cristo. Mercedes. Well, yes, you are right. That name still has its charm, and this is the first time for a long period that I have pronounced it so distinctly. Oh, Mercedes, I have uttered your name with the sigh of melancholy, with groan of sorrow, with the last effort of despair. I have uttered it when frozen with cold, crouched on the straw of my dungeon. I have uttered it, consumed with heat, rolling on the stone floor of my prison. Mercedes, I must revenge myself, for I suffered 14 years. 14 years I wept, cursed, and now I tell you, Mercedes, I must revenge myself. The Count, fearing to yield to the entreaties of her he had so ardently loved, recalled his sufferings to the assistance of his hatred. Revenge yourself then, Edmond, cried the poor mother, but let your vengeance fall on the culprits, on him, on me, but not on my son. Monte Cristo groaned and seized his beautiful hair with both hands. Edmond, continued Mercedes, with her arms extended toward the Count, since I first knew you, I have adored your name, and have respected your memory. Edmond, my friend, don't compel me to tarnish that noble and fine image reflected incessantly on the mirror of my heart. Edmond, if you knew all the prayers I have addressed to God for you while I thought you were living, and since I have thought you must be dead. Yes, dead, alas. I thought your dead body was buried on the foot of some gloomy tower. I thought your corpse was precipitated to the bottom of one of those gulfs where jailers roll their dead prisoners. And I wept. What could I do for you, Edmond, besides pray and weep? Listen, during 10 years I dreamed each night the same dream, and I have been told you had endeavored to escape, that you had taken the place of another prisoner, that you had slipped into the winding sheet of a dead body, that you had been precipitated alive from the top of the Chateau d'If, and the cry you uttered as you dashed upon the rocks first revealed to your jailers that they were your murderers. Well, Edmond, I swear to you, by the head of that son, for whom I entreat your pity, Edmond, during 10 years, I've been every night man balancing some shapeless and unknown at the top of a rock. During 10 years, I've heard each night a terrible cry which has awoken me, shuddering and cold. And I too, Edmond, oh, believe me, guilty as I was, oh yes, I too have suffered much. Have you felt your father die in your absence? Cried Monte Cristo, again thrusting his hand in his hair. Have you seen the woman you loved giving her hand to your rival while you were perishing at the bottom of a dungeon? No, interrupted Mercedes, but I have seen him whom I loved on the point of murdering my son. Mercedes pronounced these words with such deep anguish, with an accent of such intense despair, that Monte Cristo could not restrain a sob. The lion was daunted, the avenger was conquered. What do you ask of me? Said he. Your son's life? Well, he shall live. Mercedes uttered a cry which made the tears start from Monte Cristo's eyes, but those tears disappeared almost instantaneously, for doubtless God had sent some angel to collect them. Far more precious were they in his eyes than the richest pearls of Guzarat and of Ophir. Oh, said she, seizing the Count's hand and raising it to her lips. Oh, thank you, Edmond. Now you are exactly what I dreamed you were, such as I always loved you. Oh, now I must say so. So much the better, replied Monte Cristo, as that poor Edmond will not have long to be loved by you. Death is about to return to the tomb, and phantom to retire in darkness. What do you say, Edmond? I say, since you command me, Mercedes, I must die. Die, and who told you so? Who talks of dying? Whence have you these ideas of death? You do not suppose that publicly outraged in the face of a whole theater, in the presence of your friends and those of your son, challenged by a boy who will glory in my pardon as in a victory, you do not suppose I can, for some one moment, wish to live. What I most loved after you, Mercedes, was myself, my dignity, and that strength which rendered me superior to other men. That strength was my life. With one word you have crushed it, and I die. But the duel will not take place, Edmond, since you forgive. It will take place, said Monte Cristo, in a most solemn tone, but instead of your son's blood which will stain the ground, mine will flow. Mercedes shrieked, and sprang toward Monte Cristo, but suddenly stopping. "Edmond," said she, "there is a God above us, since you live, and since I have seen you again, I trust to him from my heart. While awaiting his assistance, I trust to your word. You have said my son should live, have you not?" "Yes, madame, he shall live," said Monte Cristo, surprised that, without more emotion, Mercedes had accepted the heroic sacrifice he had made for her. Mercedes extended her hand to the Count. "Edmond," said she, and her eyes were wet with tears while looking at him to whom she spoke, "how noble it is of you, how great the action you have just performed, how sublime to have taken pity on a poor woman who offered herself to you with every chance against her. Alas, I am grown old with grief more than with tears, and cannot now remind my Edmond by a smile, or by a look, of that Mercedes whom he once spent so many hours in contemplating. Ah, believe me, Edmond, I told you, I too had suffered much. I repeat it. It is melancholy to pass one's life without having one joy to recall, without preserving a single hope, but that proves that all is not over. No, it is not finished. I feel it by what remains in my heart. I repeat it, Edmond. What you have just done is beautiful. It is grand. It is sublime. Do you say so now, Mercedes? And what would you say if you knew the extent of the sacrifice I make to you? Suppose the Creator, after having made the world and vivified chaos, had stopped at the end of 1/3 of his work, in order to spare an angel the tears which the crimes of men would one day evoke from heavenly eyes. Suppose that when all was prepared, ready, quickened, God, at the time when he saw his work was good, and extinguished the sun, and kicked aside the earth into endless night, then you might have some idea of my sacrifice. But no, you cannot imagine what I lose in sacrificing my life at this moment. Mercedes looked at the Count with an air which depicted at the same time her astonishment, her admiration, and her gratitude. Monte Cristo pressed his forehead on his burning hands, as if his brain could no longer bear alone the weight of his thoughts. "Edmond," said Mercedes, "I have but one more word to say to you." The Count smiled bitterly. "Edmond," continued she, "you will see if my face is pale, if my eyes are dull, if my beauty is gone, if Mercedes, in short, no longer resembles her former self in her features. You will see her heart is still the same. Adieu then, Edmond. I have nothing more to ask of heaven. I have seen you again, and have found you as noble, as greatly as formerly you were. Adieu, Edmond. Adieu, and thank you." But the Count did not answer. Mercedes opened the door of the cabinet and had disappeared before he had recovered from the painful and profound reverie into which his thwarted vengeance had plunged him. The clock of the Invalides struck 1 when the carriage which conveyed Madame de Morcerf rolled away on the pavement of the Champs-Élysées, and made Monte Cristo raise his head. "What a fool I was," said he, "not to tear my heart out on the day when I resolved to avenge myself.